Trade by sail has been going on for thousands of years, but we have all heard the saying, any way the wind blows, right? So how can winds be predictable enough to make trade economically viable? How can you be sure that winds won't take you to Spain when you're trying to go to Brazil? Well, don't get stuck in the doldrums, and I'll explain how you can always find the winds of fortune. Let's talk about atmospheric circulation. The first thing you need to know is that air gets stressed out easily and likes to travel from high pressure areas to low pressure areas. Second thing to remember is that air heats up and cools down. When some air is heated from the sun, it rises, causing a low pressure area below it, sucking in surrounding surface air, and displaces air above it, moving it north or south. Once it cools down, the air starts to sink, creating a high pressure area below it, and again displacing air to the north or to the south. This constantly happens at the equator, where it heats up, making a low pressure area, 30 degrees latitude, where it cools down, making a high pressure area, and again heating up at 60 degrees latitude. Well, this is great, you say, but this only gets us from London to Lisbon, and I'm trying to get from Boston to Birmingham. Well, never fear, the Coriolis effect is here. You know about that, right? It's the reason that the water spins clockwise in your toilet and counterclockwise for your Australian pen pal? Wrong. You can go ahead and flush that idea. Toilets and sinks are not nearly big enough to be affected by the Coriolis effect, and their circulation is entirely based on their design. The Coriolis effect basically is momentum at work. Since the Earth's circumference is similar to that of Max's head at 24,901 miles and 0 at the poles, the air at the equator is moving much faster to keep up. When the air is displaced, it maintains the speed, causing deflection to the right, making westerly winds when moving to the north and easterly or trade winds when moving to the south. The sailing ships use the resulting trade winds extensively when planning their circumnavigation around the Atlantic.
Square-rig ships were the first kinds of vessels used for trade and transportation in the North Atlantic. A square-rig ship cannot sail upwind very well, due to their inability to brace the yards around, basically turn the sails to follow the wind, and create lift to propel them forward. This limitation forced the ships to let the prevailing wind patterns and currents dictate their trade routes. Because of the Coriolis effect, wind in the northern hemisphere moves in a clockwise direction, which is the direction the ships went. Unless, of course, you were a Viking ship, and in that case you would sail so far to the frigid north that you would be caught in a totally reverse current and be able to sail your square-rig vessel dead before the wind, but going from east to west. Anyways, these square-riggers are well adapted for long trade-wind ocean passages. They would set sail in Europe, cruise down the coast of Africa, cross over the Caribbean and up the east coast of the United States, and then sail back over to Europe. By following the route of the North Atlantic gyre, the wind would always be coming from astern, which is the best point of sail for square-rigged vessels. For example, say a sailing ship was traveling from Lisbon to Boston. They would make much better time sailing south first on the Canary Current, even though this is a perpendicular direction to their destination. At about 30 degrees north, they would turn and follow the equatorial current across the ocean, and then catch the Gulf Stream up the east coast. Same thing on their return voyage. They wouldn't just sail straight across back to Portugal. They would sail north until they reached the North Atlantic Current, cross over, and then follow the Canary Current south. As time went on, many different types of sailing rigs evolved. However, the trade wind routes remained the most efficient way to circumnavigate the Atlantic, using the wind and currents to travel. This all changed when the age of sailing ships met its demise, and the new generation of steamships dawned upon the ocean in the latter part of the 19th century.
As sailing ships were surpassed by the simplicity, speed, and reliability of power-driven vessels, shipping routes evolved. While sailing ships were not necessarily slower in speed than early powerboats, their route, a roundabout way to cross the ocean, put them at a great disadvantage. The large ports, such as Savannah, New York, and Boston, were all founded during the Age of Sail, and so the location of these busy ports was decided by sailing ships' routes. For sailing vessels, following the winds and currents clockwise around the Atlantic was the fastest way to get to the other side. Modern commercial vessels usually steam directly across the Atlantic from point A to point B. They operate against the wind and current instead of with them as the sailing ships once did. As vessels continue to grow in size and power, their existence in the ocean brings them further and further from the forces of nature.